Have you ever heard of the Nephilim? Giants mentioned in the Bible, mysterious beings that have intrigued scholars and religious people for centuries. Who were they? Why are their stories surrounded by so much mystery?
Wait a minute. Nephilim? That sounds like something straight out of a fantasy movie. Did they really exist?
Well, the word Nephilim appears in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, describing a time when the sons of God joined with the daughters of men, resulting in the birth of giants on earth.
Sons of God? Who would that be? And what do you mean by giants? This is both fascinating and scary.
Yes, and the debate over who these sons of God were is one of the greatest mysteries in theology. But before we dive deeper, leave your name in the comments along with a thoughtful question or message. Oh, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any details of this fascinating journey.
Because what we're about to reveal might change the way you see these ancient stories. Let's go.
To understand the Nephilim, we need to travel back in time to the book of Genesis where the story begins. The passage says, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown."
Men of renown. That sounds like legendary heroes, or even demigods from ancient stories. Could the Nephilim have been something like that?
That's a good analogy. Some scholars believe the phrase men of renown suggests they were known for their strength, size, and extraordinary deeds. But who were these sons of God mentioned in the text?
Good question. And what does the Bible say about it? Does it explain who they were?
Not directly. That's one of the biggest points of debate. Some interpretations suggest that the sons of God were fallen angels, while others believe they were humans descended from the line of Seth, Adam's son. The most popular theory is that the sons of God were fallen angels, spiritual beings who disobeyed God and came down to earth. This interpretation finds support in texts like the Book of Enoch, an apocryphal work that was widely respected in ancient times.
Wait, the Book of Enoch, what's that?
The Book of Enoch is an ancient text not included in the traditional Bible, but it's considered important in some traditions. It describes the Watchers, a group of angels who descended to earth, fell in love with human women, and fathered giant offspring.
So these Nephilim would be the children of angels and humans? That sounds almost mythological.
Exactly. And that opens a debate. Are these accounts literal or symbolic? Were the Nephilim real beings, or do they represent something bigger, like sin and corruption? On the other hand, some Christian traditions reject the idea that the sons of God were angels. They argue that they were men from the lineage of Seth, the godly son of Adam, who intermarried with the daughters of men from the line of Cain.
But why would that result in giants? It doesn't make much sense.
Good point. This interpretation is more symbolic, suggesting that the mixing of these lines represented humanity's corruption, not necessarily the literal birth of giants.
So depending on which viewpoint you follow, the Nephilim can be seen as mythical creatures or as a symbol of human downfall.
Exactly. And that flexibility is what makes this story so fascinating. It can be read in different ways depending on the perspective of the person interpreting it. Another important point is the flood. The Bible suggests that the Nephilim were one of the reasons God sent the flood to cleanse the earth of its corruption.
So these giants weren't just powerful, they also represented something so dangerous that God decided to intervene.
Yes. According to Genesis, the earth was filled with violence, and the Nephilim may have contributed to that. The flood was a way to restore divine order.
But the text says the Nephilim were on the earth also afterward. How did they survive the flood?
That's another big question. Some theories suggest they reappeared through other fallen angels, or that the term Nephilim was later used to describe other giant peoples.
Like the giants mentioned when Israel faced the Canaanites, right?
Exactly. And that connection brings us to the next part of our journey, the post-flood giants. When the flood came, it didn't just cleanse the earth of its corruption, it also wiped out almost all of humanity, except for Noah and his family. But here's the mystery. In Numbers 13:33, the Nephilim are mentioned again. How is that possible?
Wait, weren't they supposed to have disappeared in the flood? How did they end up being mentioned again?
Exactly. That's one of the big questions. Some scholars believe that the term Nephilim started being used as a title to describe other giant peoples who emerged after the flood, like the Anakites, whom Israel encountered in the Promised Land.
Anakites. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. Who were they?
The Anakites were described as giants living in Canaan. They were so huge that the spies Moses sent out felt like grasshoppers next to them.
Imagine looking up at someone so large that you feel like a bug. That must have been terrifying.
No doubt, but it also raises the question, were these giants descendants of the Nephilim, or was it just literary exaggeration to describe powerful and intimidating peoples? During the conquest of Canaan, the Israelites faced several giant nations. A famous example is Og of Bashan, described in Deuteronomy as the last of the Rephaim, another group associated with giants.
Og of Bashan? I've heard he had a huge bed, is that true?
Yes, the Bible mentions that his bed was more than 13 feet long. It's a detail that reinforces his reputation as a giant.
But were these giants really that tall? Or is it a metaphor for their power and influence?
It could be both. In ancient culture, exaggerations were common to highlight someone's strength or the threat they posed, but there are also those who believe these accounts are literal, based on people of extraordinary height.
Whether literal or symbolic, one thing's for sure, these giants posed a major obstacle for the people of Israel.
When we talk about biblical giants, science also comes into play. Could there really have been people of such extraordinary stature in the past?
Is there any scientific evidence for that, like skeletons or something?
Some say yes. There are claims of alleged discoveries of giant skeletons, but many have been exposed as hoaxes. What we do have are historical records and some modern medical cases of gigantism.
Ah, gigantism. That's a real medical condition, right? People with it can grow way taller than average.
Exactly. Gigantism happens when the pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone, but even the most extreme cases don't reach the sizes described in the Bible.
So maybe the biblical giants were something more than just people with gigantism, something supernatural.
To understand more about the origin of the Nephilim, we need to go back to the Book of Enoch. In it, the Watchers are described as angels who disobeyed God and taught forbidden skills to humanity.
Forbidden skills like what?
According to the text, they taught things like metallurgy, witchcraft, and astrology. These skills brought knowledge, but also corruption and chaos.
So the Nephilim weren't just giants. They were also the result of knowledge humanity wasn't ready to handle.
Exactly. That's what makes this story so complex. It's not just about giant beings, but about the dangers of crossing boundaries set by God.
That's a lesson we can still apply today. Knowledge is powerful, but it can also be dangerous if we don't use it wisely.
More than just physical beings, the Nephilim carry spiritual significance. They symbolize the corruption that occurs when the line between the divine and the human is breached.
That makes me wonder, maybe the Nephilim are more of a warning than a literal historical record, something that reminds us to respect those boundaries.
That's a valid interpretation. Many see the Nephilim as a symbol of what happens when pride and ambition lead to disobedience to God.
And that might be why they remain such a relevant story. They challenge us to think about our own limits and choices.
So who were the Nephilim? Literal giants born from the union of angels and humans? Symbols of spiritual corruption, or both? The truth is, we may never know for sure.
But maybe that's what makes this story so fascinating. It leaves us with questions that push us to reflect on ourselves and the world around us.
And no matter how you interpret the Nephilim, their story is a reminder of the importance of respecting the boundaries between the divine and the human, and of seeking wisdom in our choices.
If this story sparked your curiosity, leave a comment and share your thoughts. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that challenges us to think and explore the unknown.
The Nephilim, although mentioned directly in only 2 biblical passages, seem to have left their mark at other points in biblical history. During the conquest of Canaan, for example, we find references to giant peoples, such as the Anakim, who terrified the spies sent by Moses.
Oh, so they show up again? That makes me wonder, were these giants truly descendants of the Nephilim, or was it just a coincidence?
Good question. Some believe the Anakim were indeed direct descendants of the Nephilim, while others say the term giants was used figuratively to describe their strength and power.
What about the story of David and Goliath? Goliath was considered a giant, right? Could he also have been connected to the Nephilim?
Exactly. Goliath, the famous Philistine warrior defeated by David, is often linked to these giants. He was described as standing over 9 feet tall, around 3 meters, and belonged to a group called the Rephaim, another lineage many believe to be connected to the Nephilim.
So these giants kept appearing, even after the flood. That's fascinating, and a bit scary too.
But what if the Nephilim weren't just literal beings? What if they were also symbols of something greater, something spiritual?
You mean the story could have a deeper meaning than just what's written?
Yes. Many scholars believe the Nephilim represent corruption and moral decay that arise when the boundaries set by God are crossed. They serve as a reminder of what happens when pride and ambition lead humanity to defy divine limits.
That makes sense. Like they're a warning, reminding us not to go past certain boundaries.
And maybe that's why their story is so powerful. Even if we don't understand all the details, the message is clear. There are consequences for our choices, especially when we disobey God. Another fascinating aspect is how the story of the Nephilim may have influenced other ancient mythologies. Many cultures have legends about giants or demigods who ruled or fought against humanity.
Like the Titans in Greek mythology, for instance. They were giants who challenged the gods.
Exactly. There are parallels between the Nephilim and figures like the Titans, or even Norse mythology's heroes like Thor and his giant adversaries. This suggests that stories of giant, powerful beings are deeply rooted in human imagination.
Interesting. Maybe these stories are a way of grappling with the idea of forces greater than we are, whether physical or spiritual.
And it's possible that the Nephilim stories spread and evolved across different cultures, taking on new meanings over time. Although the Nephilim are mainly mentioned in the Old Testament, some people see connections between them and the events in the Book of Revelation in the New Testament.
How so? What do the Nephilim have to do with the end times?
Some interpretations suggest that the Nephilim, or at least the fallen angels who fathered them, could play a role in end times events. In Revelation, we read about angels falling from heaven and unleashing destruction on earth.
So, it's as though the rebellion of those angels continues to echo into future events.
Precisely. It reinforces the idea that the story of the Nephilim isn't just about the past, but also the future and the ongoing consequences of disobedience. But what does archaeology say about the Nephilim? Is there any physical evidence that could confirm their existence?
I've heard about supposed giant skeletons discovered around the world. Is any of that true?
There are many accounts of giant skeleton finds, but most have been debunked as hoaxes or exaggerations. However, some ancient cultures, like the Sumerians and Egyptians, left records suggesting the existence of people of unusual height.
What about nowadays? Do people still report sightings of giants?
Yes, though rarely. A few isolated communities claim to have seen extraordinarily tall individuals, but nothing has been scientifically proven.
So the Nephilim remain a mystery, something that challenges both science and faith.
Another key point is the debate over what the Nephilim really were. Were they purely physical beings, flesh and blood, or did they also possess a spiritual dimension?
If they were children of fallen angels, it makes sense to think they might have been more than just physical, right?
Exactly. Some traditions suggest the Nephilim had supernatural abilities, like immense strength or advanced intelligence, which would have made them even more frightening.
But that raises another question. If they were so powerful, why did they vanish?
Maybe because their very existence was unsustainable. They represented an imbalance in God's creation, something that would eventually have to be corrected. In the end, the story of the Nephilim is more than just a biblical curiosity. It invites us to think about human limits and the consequences of pushing beyond them.
And also about how the unknown continues to fascinate and challenge us. The Nephilim remind us there's more in heaven and on earth than we can truly understand.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all, accepting that not everything needs to be fully understood in order to profoundly impact our lives and our faith.
The Nephilim may have disappeared, but their story lives on, encouraging us to explore, to question, and to search for answers, even when they seem just out of reach. Yural.
The more we delve into the Nephilim, the more we realize this story isn't just about giants or extraordinary beings. It also invites us to ponder the supernatural, dimensions that go beyond what we can see or explain with science and logic.
Interesting. Do you think the Nephilim represent something like the intersection of the divine and the human? Something we can't fully grasp?
Exactly. Think about it. The Nephilim come from an unusual union, the sons of God and the daughters of men. That idea alone raises questions about how these two worlds, the heavenly and the earthly, might connect. And when you add the accounts of their extraordinary abilities and the corruption they brought, the mystery only grows deeper.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's what makes the story so captivating. It blends the human and the divine, but also the dangerous. It's like the Nephilim serve as a warning about what happens when we cross boundaries we shouldn't.
And we can't talk about the Nephilim without going back to the fallen angels. In the Book of Enoch, these angels, called the Watchers, play a central role in the creation of the Nephilim. They're described as angels who came down to earth and chose to defy the divine order by having relationships with human women.
But why would they do that? If they were angels, shouldn't they have been in harmony with God?
That's one of the big questions. Some interpretations suggest they were driven by desire or curiosity. Others say they wanted to challenge God's authority, seeking power or trying to create something that would give them control over the earthly realm.
That sounds very human, doesn't it? Desire, power, rebellion. It's like they ended up becoming more like humanity than the divine.
Exactly. And that closeness might have been the reason for their downfall. They crossed a line they weren't supposed to, and that led to catastrophic consequences for them, for the Nephilim, and for humanity as a whole. Another fascinating point about the fallen angels is that according to the Book of Enoch, they not only fathered the Nephilim, but also brought forbidden knowledge to humankind. Among these were astrology, magic, and the use of metals to make weapons.
So they not only disobeyed God, but also taught things that could completely change the way humans lived. It seems like they wanted to transform humanity in some way.
Yes, and that's what makes this story so intriguing. This knowledge, while useful, also brought destruction. For example, the use of weapons increased violence and war. Magic and astrology turned people away from a life focused on God, leading them to seek power on their own.
It's like they gave humanity tools to advance, but without the maturity to handle them. It almost feels like a metaphor for today's technological breakthroughs, doesn't it?
No doubt. And that's one reason these stories remain so relevant. They make us think about the dangers of pushing limits without considering the consequences. And it was precisely because of these transgressions that, according to the Bible, God sent the flood, not just to wipe out humanity's sins, but also to eradicate the Nephilim and everything they stood for.
But wait, was the flood really a definitive solution? Because as you mentioned earlier, it seems that some giant stories persisted even after that.
That's true. It raises two possibilities. The first is that some Nephilim survived somehow, maybe because they were out of the flood's reach. The second is that new unions between the sons of God and the daughters of men took place afterward, creating a new generation of Nephilim.
Either way, it seems humanity continued to face the consequences of those transgressions. It's like the problem was bigger than just the Nephilim themselves.
Exactly. And that leads us to a deeper question. The Nephilim were only a manifestation of something much broader, the corruption and rebellion that arise when creation strays from the divine purpose. So, what do the Nephilim represent for us today? Are they just an ancient tale, or do they have something to teach us in the modern world?
I think they remind us how important it is to respect boundaries, whether spiritual, ethical, or even scientific. Because when those boundaries are crossed, the consequences can be devastating.
Exactly. And more than that, they challenge us to think about what it means to be human, about finding a balance between the desire to grow and the responsibility to use that growth for good.
Maybe that's why these stories never die. They show us that even when we're up against forces bigger than ourselves, choosing what's right is still in our hands.
And perhaps that's the most powerful lesson from the Nephilim, the reminder that even in a world full of mysteries and challenges, we are still responsible for the impact we leave behind. We've reached the end of this journey, but the mystery of the Nephilim is still alive. Even though we've explored their origins, their impact, and their symbolism, they remain an enigma, both in history and in theology.
And maybe that's the biggest secret about them, right? They urge us to think, to question, and to seek out answers, even when those answers never come fully formed.
Exactly. The Nephilim are more than a story about giants or fallen angels. They're a reflection of human dilemmas, our pursuit of knowledge, power, and the dangers that come with it. At the same time, they remind us of the consequences of ignoring the boundaries set by God or by nature itself.
It's fascinating how something so ancient can still resonate today. Even if the circumstances have changed, the core challenges remain the same. Figuring out how far we can go without stepping beyond what's been granted to us.
Speaking of modern challenges, have you ever stopped to consider how the Nephilim story echoes the issues we face today? Take the advances in science and technology, for example. We're living in an age of incredible discoveries, but it also forces us to question how far we can go without losing control.
That's true. It's almost like we're in a new Nephilim age, except with different tools. Look at genetic manipulation, for instance. If in the past it was fallen angels toying with creation, now it's us, humans, trying to reshape life in ways we never imagined.
That doesn't mean progress is bad, but just like in the Nephilim story, there's a fine line between advancement and abuse. Our thirst for power and knowledge can lead to dark places if we don't know how to use it wisely.
Exactly. Maybe that's the big lesson from the Nephilim. It's not just about what we can do, but about what we should do. And that choice is ours to make.
Another important point is how the Nephilim connect us to a spiritual dimension. They remind us that no matter how hard we try to control everything, there are still greater forces at work, be it God, nature, or even the universe.
Right. I think, deep down, their story makes us question our place in the world. Are we living the way we were meant to? Or are we trying to become something we were never meant to be?
That's a powerful question. And maybe the Nephilim serve as a reminder that when we stray from the divine purpose, the consequences can be catastrophic, not just for us, but for everything around us.
So, in the end, they challenge us to think about our relationship with God, with others, and with the world. And that's something that never stops being relevant, no matter the era.
Now, we want to leave you with a question for everyone who's been with us so far. How does the Nephilim story resonate in your own life? Are there limits you've crossed, or maybe you're trying to respect? Because at the end of the day, we all face dilemmas like these.
And remember, the Nephilim story isn't just about mistakes and destruction. It's also a story of learning, of fresh starts. Even when the world seems to be spiraling out of control, there's still a chance to restore balance, to make better choices.
And that's the beauty of what we've learned. No matter how huge the challenge or how complex the story, there's always something to take away, something that can make us better. If you've come this far, we want to thank you for spending this time with us. We hope you've learned something new or at least found a reason to reflect.
And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It really helps us keep bringing you content like this, full of mystery, reflection, and history.
Plus, we have plenty of other fascinating videos waiting for you. How about exploring more about biblical mysteries, the stories of ancient civilizations, or the big questions that still intrigue humanity?
So don't forget, hit that like button, share it with someone you think will enjoy it, and we'll see you in the next mystery. Until then.
And remember, the world is full of stories just waiting to be told, some as old as time, yet still teaching us something new every day.